Hello again. These are all my hands. My voice is somewhere up here. I'm Baymud, and this once again is the Zoom LiveTrak L6 in front of me. I bought this unit about 6 months ago. There's an L6 months joke title in there somewhere. You can have it. And I thought it might be worth revisiting how I feel about it 6 months and a lot of extensive use in different scenarios later. I should say off the top, I don't do a lot of gear reviews on this channel, mostly tutorials or live jams or tips and tricks videos, but I thought the L6 merited a bit of extra scrutiny because of how visible it is in a lot of videos I do. I didn't want that to be misconstrued for endorsement because it is limited and quirky and it may not fit everyone's workflow, so I thought I could put forth my experience to help you understand whether or not it might be right for you. As I said, I use it a lot in different scenarios. Most recently, it's been the mixer for my portable synth rig, where I also use the internal SD card recording to record multi-track live sets that I will never listen to again. And then also, I've done a lot of multi-track USB recording into Reaper via the L6 as an interface, which has been very handy too. And then most importantly for this case, since I've had it, in the 6 months I've had it, every video on this YouTube channel has gone through it in some way, whether it's been in frame or not. In fact, most of the time, it's probably just to the right of the camera, but everything is still going through it that is being recorded. Like today, this mic is going in here, then the USB to the phone above, and these headphones are on my head where they should be. So that all equals a lot of extensive experience using it in many different ways and exploring a lot of the features. So how do I feel? Long story short, I bought this for about 400 Canadian on sale about 6 months ago. And yeah, I would buy it again knowing what I know now, but that's my particular use case, and knowing the limitations it has, they're fine with me because I needed something small and under a certain price point. But your needs may be different, especially after we talk about some of the limitations we're going to get into. First up, the pros, of course. I mentioned the size, and I feel like the versatility of feature set for the price are hard to beat right now. Some people have mentioned, say, something like a 1010 Blue Box, but in Canada, they're more expensive than this. I think the USB, at the time of this video, I think the USB interface functionality on the Blue Box is a little less robust than the L6. So for me, this is just kind of where I landed in terms of what I needed for that feature set. And I've really come to like certain things like the scenes feature. So I can press one of these 3 buttons and change mute states or pans or whatever, however I've set it up. And it's really handy in a live context. Also MIDI, I use a lot to send the MIDI clock in or out to other gear, depending on what I'm trying to do, or if I want to sync, say, the delay times on the L6. But yeah, I don't know that I would buy a mixer going forward that didn't have some kind of MIDI integration or some kind of scene type feature. They're just very handy, and the fact that they're included in this small a package is great. Moving on to the cons, I've already done a video on some of the key limitations I discovered when I first started using the L6, so we'll recap them here, but if you want more details, go to the link that's up there somewhere. Basically, you can't mute the master without also muting the monitor, so in a home recording USB interface scenario, that can be a bit interesting because if you're recording, say, a singer, you don't want your speakers on, but then you can't have your headphones on either. It's a bit of a quirky one. You can either unplug, or some people suggest getting a little box that goes after your L6 to do your headphone splitting there. I begrudge having to buy a little box to go with the thing that I bought because it was a little box, but do with that what you will. Also, the aux sends are each mono only, and they do not equal stereo if you use them both. That may not matter to you, but for someone like me who does stereo resampling into the deluge, that was something I did have to find a workaround for. And in that video, I detail some routing tricks that I ended up using. We talk about the 32-bit float of it a little bit later, but suffice it to say, there are no gain controls. The level controls just dictate how much of each of your channel go through the master, but there are no trim gain or clip gain on the unit itself. You have to deal with the gain on the way in from the device itself, or let 32-bit float handle it because it can and deal with it later in your DAW. So those are some ones that I talked about before. I can't remember if I've mentioned this already, but it's not necessarily the L6's fault. A lot of smaller mixers fall victim to this lately. There are no return channels or dedicated return inputs. So if you're using the aux sends to go out to effects units or other units, and you want to bring those signals back to be mixed by the L6 again, you have to use up a channel, which is pretty common, unfortunately. I understand why it would just take up more space and more money to add that stuff here, but I would argue you could get rid of the sound pads, but don't tell anyone I said that. So anyway, that's something you just have to think about. Now for some things I hadn't mentioned before or only kind of really learned about with more use. I've got the Modern Sounds Pluto in frame now. It is plugged in via this stereo cable here into channel 5. And I chose channel 5 for a very specific reason, because just like the auxiliary sends, the USB send and return needs to take up a channel to be effectively used. Right now, we're sending my voice to the camera there via this USB. But if I wanted to play something from that phone and then mix it into the Zoom L6, I could do that, no problem. But it would need to use one of these channels. Specifically, channels 5 and 6 have buttons to allow USB. So let's unmute the Pluto so we can hear some haunting ambience under my dulcet vocal tones here. But you'll see, let's say I had a synth on my iPad or computer or whatever, and I wanted to mix that in. I would have to press one of these USB buttons depending on the channels I was using for USB. So here's USB channel 1 or 2, USB channel 3 or 4, probably defaults to 1 or 2. Uh-oh. I lost the Pluto because I need the USB coming through here. So the USB supersedes whatever is plugged into the physical inputs when this button is on. So right now I could just move the Pluto to a different channel and I'd be fine. Or I could move the USB to 5 and 6 and I'd be fine, assuming that my routing in my device allowed me to do that. But in most cases for me, my inputs are full. Everything's full up. So if I want to use the USB, I end up losing something. And that's just a compromise you have to make depending on how important certain signals are for you, given how many inputs you actually have. And personally, if you're me, it leads to another thing I do a lot in the last 6 months, which is forget that I've pressed this button. So sometimes the Zoom is sitting over there and I'm doing other things here and I get in the thick of it, and then I check something on my phone and want to listen to it, and then I go back to do another recording or video or whatever, and I realize 20 minutes later that nothing in this channel has been part of it because I left this green, bright, glowing button on and didn't notice somehow. So in any case, because you don't have a dedicated USB return and you have to use up one of the channels for it, you can be in the scenario like me, if you're a big dumb idiot, where you forget to turn that button off and then your lonely Pluto is singing to no one. There's an album title in there somewhere, maybe. And since we're talking about things that don't have their own channels, and I've already insulted the sound pads once, we might as well talk about them too, because I have been using them more. I did a whole video on what you can do with them. I'll link that somewhere up here. But right now, I actually think I have some one-shot vocal samples from that weird banana jam I did a little while ago that no one really watched, but here you go. Potassium. If you ever wanted a vocal sample of me saying the word potassium over and over again, now is your chance. Basically, what I've noticed with the sound pads is that they also don't have a dedicated channel, but instead of taking one up when you need to use them, they simply just don't get one and they go directly through the master only. So they don't get to be part of the effects or any of the other kind of EQ and panning and all that stuff. I guess the argument would be, you're supposed to, the way you record into the sound pads is you're supposed to kind of capture that stuff on the way in. But it does make for an interesting limitation when you are using them in a larger recording context. For example, in the aforementioned banana jam that I did recently, I was using these for vocal one-shots. And when I recorded the entire thing via the Zoom SD card recorder, I noticed later when I opened the files up in Reaper to do some mixing that the sound pads, unlike all the other channels, the sound pads do not get their own wave file or their own channel at all. They are simply rendered down with the master. So they're the only place you hear the sound pad results is in the 2-track stereo master mixdown. So if you haven't gotten this volume knob right for the context of your sound pad mix, then there's not much you can do about it after. I mean, you do have access to the files. They're in the sound pad folder on the SD card. So what I had to do was go in and get those vocal files, put them on their own track in Reaper and sync them up with where they were in the actual master file recording, so then I could adjust their level a bit. But it's a limitation to understand about the sound pads, which I have already said I do sort of wish, instead of the sound pads, this was just a dedicated USB return or aux send return or something, but maybe you love the sound pads and you want me to stop saying bad things about them. So moving on. As I've mentioned the master track a bunch too, we might as well talk about the compressor, because some of you may be looking at the feature set that you see listed on the Zoom site, for instance, and say, great, there's a compressor. I can compress my vocals on the way in, blah, blah, blah. Well, not really. This wouldn't be that kind of compressor for you. It's not a per channel compressor that you can use and tweak settings or whatever. It's really just an on-off. Now I'm a bit more compressed, on-off for the master output only. So when you hear my vocal here with the compressor on, that's because we're listening through the master output. But if we were to record what I was just doing there and you looked at the file for channel 1, which is my vocal here, the compressor would not be applied to that, only to the master track. So it's meant for, you've got your max gain coming in and 32-bit float is handling that. But then when you send to, with the level knobs here, you send to the master out, you want volume without clipping, and that's what this master compressor is able to do. Limit the clipping while maximizing the volume, but only on the master channel. It's not going to apply individually to the channel. You can't send a little bit to the master compressor or just have it apply to certain tracks or whatever. It's basically an on-off compressor you have zero control over, even in the companion app, as far as I remember. And so it's useful in a context of not clipping the master, but it's not useful in the context of, I just want to compress my vocals on the way in to be recorded or whatever. So just keep that in mind if you're looking for a built-in compressor on your mixer. And I may have mentioned this next bit in another video, but I believe it bears repeating because as someone who really appreciates the SD card recorder, I do have to acknowledge how limited it is in usefulness on the device beyond just capturing what you're doing. To put that in perspective, I can press record and talk now for a little bit, and it will record whatever's going through the mixer right now. And when I press record again, it will stop. And now when I press play, it will simply play back exactly what I just recorded and talk now for a little bit, and it will record whatever's going through the mixer. It's useful in that context, but a couple things to note there. One, when I could not talk while that was playing, it mutes whatever else is going through the mixer at that point and you don't hear it. So I don't know when you would want to maybe play or talk over something that's coming out of that main recording. But also, you don't have access to play or choose the track you would like to play back on the device itself. You have to open up the companion app and do some finagling there or move some files around on the SD card. Basically, this is just to record for posterity and then be able to play back the last thing you recorded only. You can't go and find the one before that or scrub through to a different file. It's very limited in its user interface. And I understand why, but it does limit the utility of it. So it becomes more of a record for posterity and never listen to your files again. And now I'd like to clear up a misconception that I noticed in some comments on some prior videos I've done on the Zoom, which center around channels 1 and 2. The understanding seems to be that channels 1 and 2 are the only ones that support 32-bit float, and that's not correct. All the channels on the L6 can do 32-bit float recording. I believe I understand where this is coming from a bit. The manual's a bit wishy-washy in the way this is worded with another feature we're about to talk about, but I've done a lot of recording with this in terms of USB interface or to the SD card or whatever, and all the other stuff in all the other channels is also 32-bit float. So don't worry about that. They're all the same in that regard. You can set the unit to 24-bit in general if you just don't want to deal with 32-bit float, but if it comes set to 32, and if you set your interface or your DAW to 32, like I've set Reaper to default to 32-bit float now, everything works fine. Where channels 1 and 2 are different is that they are the only two that have dual AD converters. And what that means is they will try to switch between low gain converter and high gain audio converter, depending on the source that's being recorded. As I mentioned, you have no gain control on the unit itself. With 32-bit float or whatever, it's just trying to get max gain and then deal with it later. But in channels 1 and 2, it will try to adapt a little bit. And in the manual, there's a page on this with some cartoons where it depicts people doing like a quiet conversation or maybe a musical performance, or maybe you're recording and a plane suddenly flies overhead because you forgot you're at the airport. The dual converters will adapt and try to compensate for how much gain you need at the time, which is handy, but I do wish you had a bit of control over it yourself for the reasons I'm about to explain. In the case of what I'm doing right now, being recording a YouTube video, a voiceover, I have noticed an opportunity where there's an increased noise floor because of what I think is the AD converters switching. To explain, right now, if I'm talking and then I stop, take a look at my notes or go get a glass of water or whatever, the Zoom seems to assume it needs to amp the gain up. And then when I come back and start talking again, it drops down. Now, when I go to edit those files later, I can hear a fade in of a bit of an increased noise floor. It's not crazy. It's 5 to 10 dB max, but it is measurable. I can put a little screenshot up of what I found in Reaper. So, I'm not insane, but I'm just a little picky maybe. But it drops out when I start talking again, which is great. But in the meantime, when I try to edit those files together, sometimes it can lead to little blips of white noise, depending. So I have to remember to fade in a cut or do a noise gate on them. It's just something I've noticed in this use case of recording a voiceover. So let's try it. I'm going to do the thing you all need me to do, which is stop talking for a minute, and then we'll hear, if you've got headphones or whatever, maybe you'll hear the noise floor join a little higher. I'll amp up the level on the mic, and then I'm going to stop talking. Now, maybe you heard something there. Maybe you didn't, and maybe it's just proof that I am a little insane, but I can tell you that whenever I'm editing these videos, when there's a gap like that, I have to be a little careful and make sure I've done some fades here and there, because otherwise there's a bit of an increase in noise floor that just bothers me from a noise perspective. I don't know that anyone else would run into this ever, but I do think it's because of those converters dynamically changing to adjust for how much gain it thinks I need. When the reality is I need none because I'm in the bathroom or something else. But in any case, that's one of the bigger things I learned that kind of made me actually do this video, because I hadn't heard anyone talk about it, and it probably won't affect anyone else but me, but I thought it was worth putting out there on the internet for no one to watch. I buried it at the end of the video, so you're probably not here anyway. But in case that's useful to you, hopefully you now understand a bit of where I'm coming from. So there we go. Those are some things I've learned. And to recap, yes, I'm still happy with the L6. Yes, I would still have spent 400 Canadian on it, no problem, because of what it does and how it fits into my workflow, despite the limitations and compromises. Now, will it work for you? You have to decide that based on the info provided. I've had people tell me that they won't buy one now because of certain things I've mentioned, and that makes me just as happy as people saying they will buy one because of features I've shown off, because Zoom's not paying me. I don't care if you own an L6. I mostly care that it was helpful to make a decision for you to help your workflow. So let me know what you pick up instead, or if you get one of these and you're super happy with it. I think some people are hoping that there'll be some firmware updates to some of these issues, but I'm not holding out hope. Maybe I'll look like an idiot, and by the time this video's up, they will announce one that fixes a bunch of stuff. But my advice, if you choose to take it, and you maybe not, who cares? Only buy stuff for the thing it does at the time. Don't buy something hoping for the firmware update that may never come, or that you think is deserved or whatever, because that's just a recipe for, being unhappy with the gear you bought. So, I try my best to buy things for the features I know they have. And then sometimes I'm surprised, like I could have done more research and realized, oh, mono sends, whatever. But if it still works for you, it still works for you. So anyway, this has been a recap of the Zoom L6 6 months later. Hopefully I have this for another 6 years. Who knows? It's super handy. I'm happy with it. But like I said, you have to decide if it's right for you. I don't do a lot of gear reviews to this extent. I just kind of ramble about stuff or show off tips and tricks. If you'd like to see more on, say, the MIDI capabilities of the L6, or you think there's something I haven't covered that would be fun to talk about with this unit, let me know. I'm happy to give it a shot. Otherwise, I'll be back with some more weird gear talk or demos of some crazy synths or something in the weeks to come.